I never thought I would be a protagonist of a horror story. I always thought that I was just a normal guy living a normal life. But everything changed when I found out that my ex-girlfriend, the one I thought I knew so well, was actually a witch. It all started when I received strange packages in the mail. It was a small wooden box with intricate carvings on it. Inside, there was a note that read, "I hope you enjoyed this little gift. It's a reminder of our time together." I immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from my ex-girlfriend, Lily. I haven't spoken to Lily in months. Our breakup was messy to say the least. She had always been interested in witchcraft and the occult, and I never took it seriously. But now, receiving the mysterious package, I couldn't feel a sense of unease. I decided to confront Lily about it. I called her and asked her about the package. She seemed surprised that I had received it, claiming that she had sent it months ago. But something in her tone made me suspicious. It was almost as if she was hiding something. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off about Lily. I started to do some research on witchcraft and the occult, trying to understand her interests better. That's when I stumbled upon an article about a coven of witches in our town. The article mentioned of a woman named Lily as one of the members. I couldn't believe it. My ex-girlfriend was a witch and I had no idea. I felt a mix of fear and curiosity. I wanted to know more about her involvement in this coven, but at the same time, I was afraid of what I might find out. I decided to attend one of their meetings just to see what it was about. I found the location of their gathering through some online forums, and I made my way there on a dark and a stormy night. As I approached the abandoned warehouse where the coven was set to meet, I could hear faint chanting and smell the scent of incense. I cautiously made my way inside, trying not to be noticed. What I saw inside was something out of a nightmare. There were people dressed in black robes, their faces painted with strange symbols. In the center of the room was Lily, standing in front of a large cauldron, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. I was about to turn and run when Lily's eyes met mine. She had a look of pure hatred in her eyes, and I knew that I had been caught. The other members of the coven turned to look at me, and I could feel their eyes boring into me. I tried to run, but it was too late. They had already surrounded me, their hands reaching out to grab me. I could feel their cold, bony fingers digging into my skin, and I knew I was in serious trouble. Lily stepped forward and whispered in my ear, "You should have not come here. You were never meant to know our secrets." And with that, she plunged a knife into my chest. I woke up in a cold sweat, realizing it was all just a nightmare. But the fear and unease lingered. I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was some truth to my dream. The next day, I decided to confront Lily about what I had seen. I went to her house, but she wasn't there. Her neighbor told me that she would left town suddenly without saying goodbye to anyone. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had witnessed at the coven meeting. I started to do some research and discovered that the coven was known for their dark and dangerous rituals. They were rumored to have sacrificed innocent people in the past, and I feared that I could have been their next victim. But the more I dig, the more I realized that Lily was not just a member of the coven, she was the leader. She was the one in charge of all the dark and twisted rituals, and I had been dating her without even knowing the truth. I couldn't believe that I had been so blind. Lily had always been fascinated with the supernatural, and I had dismissed it as a harmless hobby. But now I realized that she was capable of unspeakable acts, and I had been lucky to escape with my life. I tried to put the whole ordeal behind me, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that Lily was still out there, watching me. I started to see her in my dreams, her eyes filled with malice and her voice whispering threats. I became paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that she would come back for me. I even started to see strange symbols and signs around my house if she was trying to send a message. But the worst part was when I started to see Lily's face in the faces of strangers. I would see her in the grocery store, on the street, and even in my own reflection. It was as if she was haunting me, reminding me that I could never escape her. I knew I had to do something to protect myself. I sought the help of a sidekick, who told me that Lily had just put a curse on me, and that I needed to break it before it was too late. It was a terrifying experience, but I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders when it was done. I thought it was all over, but I was wrong. A few weeks later, I received another package in the mail. It was another wooden box, but this time it contained a lock of my hair and a note read, "You can never escape me. I will always be with you." I knew that Lily was still out there. She would stop at nothing to get revenge on me. I live in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, afraid that Lily will come back for me. I never thought my ex-girlfriend would turn out to be a witch, but now I know that anything was possible. And I can never be sure that she won't come back to haunt me again. I was always told to stay away from the woods. As a kid, I was naturally curious and adventurous, but the warning of the old witch living in the dark depths of the forest instilled a sense of fear in me. My friends and I would often dare each other to venture into the woods, but none of us had ever mustered the courage to actually do it. One day, as I was walking home from school, I heard whispers coming from the woods. It sounded like a woman's voice, but it was dark and eerie. I could feel a chill running down my spine, and my heart began to race with fear. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about the voice in the woods. I decided to ask my parents about it, hoping they would calm my fears. To my surprise, they looked at each other with concern written all over their faces. "Stay away from the woods, sweetheart. There was an old witch living there, and she's not someone to be messed with," my mom warned with a stern look. "But why?" "What does she do?" I asked, my curiosity overtaking my fear. My dad leaned closer to me and whispered, "They say she was once a kind lady, but she made a deal with the devil to gain magical powers. Now she roams the woods, looking for innocent children to lure in and take their souls." I shuddered at the thought of a witch living not too far from my house. I knew I should heed my parents' warning, but my curiosity was too strong. I had to see for myself if the witch truly existed. That night, under the cover of darkness, I sneaked out of my bedroom window and made my way towards the woods. The closer I got, the stronger the whispers became. It was as if the woods were calling out to me, enticing to me to get closer. As I entered the woods, the atmosphere changed. The air became thick and heavy, and the once peaceful trees now seemed to loom over me with a menacing presence. But I couldn't turn back, not when I was so close to solving the mystery of the witch. I followed the whispers, trying to figure out where they were coming from. Then, I saw her. She was standing in the middle of a clearing, her long black hair covering her face. I could feel her dark energy radiating from her. With trembling legs, I took a step closer and called out, "Are you the witch who lives in the woods?" She slowly raised her head, revealing her twisted and wrinkled face. Her eyes were dark and her teeth were yellow and rotten. She cackled and said, "Yes, I am the witch you seek. What brings a young child like you into my domain?" I swallowed hard, trying to muster my courage. "I wanted to know if the stories about you were true." She cackled and replied, "Oh, my dear, the stories are much worse than the reality. But if you're looking for horror, I can show you." With a flick of her hand, the trees surrounding us began to move, their branches twisting and contorting towards us. I screamed and ran away as fast as I could, the witch's cackles echoing behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my home. I was panting and sweating, my heart beating in my chest. My parents scolded me for sneaking out and warned me to never go near the woods again. But I couldn't stop thinking about the witch and the power she possessed. The next day, I mustered up the courage to go back into the woods. This time, I was prepared. I brought a pocket knife just in case. As I made my way through the woods, I couldn't find the clearing where I had encountered the witch. I started to think that maybe it was just all a bad dream. But then I heard the whispers again. This time they were calling my name. I followed the sound until I found myself face to face with the witch. "Back so soon, my dear," she cackled, her voice sending chills down my spine. I took a step back, feeling my pocket knife in my pocket for reassurance. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, with more confidence than I actually felt. The witch let out a cackle and replied, "Is that so? Well, let's see if you can survive my little game." She waved her hand and the trees around us began to move, the branches reaching for me. I quickly pulled out my pocket knife and started slashing at the branches, trying to break free. But they kept coming, and soon I was completely surrounded by the twisted and contorted trees. The witch watched with amusement as I struggled to escape. Just when I thought it was all over, she appeared in front of me and whispered, "You are strong, my dear. I think I will let you live for now." With a flick of her hand, the trees retreated when I was free. I ran as I could, no looking back until I reached the safety of my house. From that day on, I stayed away from the woods. I realized that the witch was not to be taken lightly and her powers were not to be trifled with. But I couldn't help but wonder, what if I hadn't escaped from her game? Would I have become another victim, lost in the depths of a woods? I learned my lesson. The woods were not a place to be explored, and the witch that lived there was not just a scary story. She was a real danger that I was lucky to escape from. Growing up in a small town, I always knew my neighbors and Mrs. Thompson was a bit peculiar. She lived alone in a rundown house at the end of our street, surrounded by overgrown plants and an eerie silence. But it wasn't until I turned 13 that I started to suspect something sinister about her. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a cold, foggy evening and I was coming home from school when I saw Mrs. Thompson in front of her yard. She was dressed in a long black cloak and was holding a strange-looking book in one hand, while chanting in a language I couldn't understand. I froze in my tracks, my heart racing with fear. But before I could make a run for it, she turned and looked directly at me with a wicked smile from her face. From that moment on, I couldn't shake off the feeling that Mrs. Thompson was up to something wicked. I started to notice strange things happening around her house, mysterious noises, flickering lights, and an eerie glow coming from her windows at night. My curiosity soon turned into an obsession. I couldn't help but investigate. I would sneak around her house, trying to catch a glimpse of what's going on inside. But every time I got close, I would be hit with a strong force that would send me running back home. It was as if Mrs. Thompson had some kind of dark magic protecting her. But my curiosity only grew stronger, and I couldn't resist the temptation to find out what was really going on. So, one night, I gathered my courage and decided to sneak into the house. I crept through the overgrown bushes and made my way to her front door, my heart pounding with fear and excitement. I turned the doorknob, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. I cautiously entered her house, and the first thing that hit me was the pungent smell of incense and herbs. As I made my way further into the house, I came across a room that sent chills down my spine. It was filled with strange objects, dried animal parts, bones, and jars filled with unknown substances. And in the center of the room, there was a large cauldron filled with bubbling liquid. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Mrs. Thompson was practicing witchcraft. My mind couldn't wrap around the fact that my quiet elderly neighbor was a witch. But then, I heard creaking noise coming from the stairs, and I knew I had to hide. I quickly ducked behind a shelf, my heart racing with fear as I heard Mrs. Thompson's footsteps getting closer. She entered the room and sent straight to the cauldron, mustering incantations under her breath. I watched in horror as she added various ingredients to the potion, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. But as she continued her ritual, I couldn't help but notice that she was struggling. The potion wasn't turning out as she hoped, and she was becoming frustrated. Suddenly, she let out a blood-curdling scream and threw the cauldron against the wall to a fit of rage. I knew I'd have to get out of there before she discovered me, so I started to make my way towards the door. But as I turned to leave, I knocked over a jar and shattered it on the ground, making a loud noise. I froze, my heart pounding as I waited for Mrs. Thompson's reaction. But to my surprise, she didn't come after me. Instead, I heard her mutter curses and then a loud crash as something fell to the ground. I knew I had to get out of here, so I ran as fast as I could, not looking back until I reached the safety of my own home. The next day, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. I couldn't believe what I had witnessed, and I was terrified of what Mrs. Thompson might do to me if she found out that I'd been in her house. To my surprise, nothing happened. Days turned into weeks, and I started to relax, thinking maybe Mrs. Thompson had just having a bad night. But then, strange things started to happen. My family's pets would go missing without a trace, and I would go find strange symbols etched into the walls of our house. I knew it had to be Mrs. Thompson's doing, and I was certain she was out for revenge. But things took a dark turn when my parents started acting strangely. They became distant and cold, and I could see the fear in their eyes whenever they looked at me. It wasn't until one night when I woke up to the sound of chanting coming from my parents' room, and I knew for sure Mrs. Thompson put a spell on them. I knew I had to do something before it was too late. With the help of a friend, I started researching everything I could about witchcraft and how to break a spell. We stumbled upon an old book that had instructions on how to create a counter potion to reverse the effects of a spell. With shaking hands, we gathered the ingredients and headed to Mrs. Thompson's house. We snuck in and made our way to the room where she kept her cauldron. We quickly mixed the ingredients and poured the potion into the cauldron, stirring it with all our might. As the potion started to bubble and change color, we can feel the weight of the spell lifting from my shoulders. And just as the potion turned bright green, Mrs. Thompson burst into the room with a look of fury on her face. But before she could cast a spell on us, we threw the potion at her, causing her to disappear in a puff of smoke. We quickly ran out of the house and back to my home, where we found my parents back to their normal selves. From that day on, Mrs. Thompson was never seen again. Some say she moved away, while others believe she met her fate at the hands of her own powers. But the one thing I know for sure is that I will never forget the horrors that I witnessed in my neighbor's house and the power of witchcraft that I never believed in until that fateful night.